Stand up. You're a king. What is wrong, my brother?
I'm afraid, man. I don't think I'm ready.
Have you not trained your whole life for this? Have you not studied and prepared for this? You're ready.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just not ready to be without you.
Are you done? Are you done? Because, you know, you don't have to host this show by yourself. It's all three of us hosting it together.
For real? Oh, okay. Cool. I'm good. This ain't fitting right. Oh.
There you go,
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Got my back.
My brother.
All right. All right, well, welcome to Film Therapy. So you saw that we're going to be talking about Black Panther today. We're going to be talking today about some central themes, some characters, the external, the internal journey, and then we have our friend Nathaniel McGuire here who's going to show us and tell us what it really means when we dig into film, into story, and there's some therapeutic aspects of that all too. So I'm just going to start off. So I want to know from you guys, what are some of the central themes or ideas that really stood out to you in the film? So DJ, why don't you go first?
Okay, well, first of all, I really love this film. It's one of my favorite films. It'll probably be forever in the favorite film category. Yes. I think identity was a huge thing that stood out in the film. That question was asked a lot throughout the film, and they had to identify themselves a lot through the markings in their lower lip. But it's also the last question asked in the film when the little boy asked the Black Panther, "Who are you?" after he comes back to California. So
that was definitely one of the central themes that stood out for me as well. Before we get into a lot of the deep conversation, so Nathan, what are some of the things that kind of stood out for you?
There's a family aspect to it that we see throughout the whole movie, this family structure. I love how this powerful family is also just down to earth, but throughout the whole aspect, there's this sense of unity, compassion, and empathy. So all these strong things that I think are very important for society just to be healthy is throughout this whole film. And you know, one of the main aspects is these are Black people, right, being displayed on film, showing us interact with each other in a very different way, but showing us in power, but still being loving and compassionate. So I just thought that was absolutely amazing.
Okay, well, I like both of those. I would say definitely identity is one for me, and also, this is my brother here if you haven't figured that one out, but the whole familial aspect of it is really cool. I love the way that they represented the relationship between brother and sister. And also take that a little step further, it's like we think of heroes, and typically we think, you know, that they don't have any flaws and like they don't need anybody. But the fact that King T'Challa, he actually needed his sister in order to complete the mission, as well as a host of other characters in the film, which I really love was just the female aspect of it all. So his sister, and then of course you've got Okoye, and of course you can't forget that, and I always have a hard time, so it was the Dora Milaje?
yeah.
Okay, there was...
Or Dora Milaje.
Dora Milaje?
I'm
I don't
not
know,
sure.
we'll fix
Forgive
that in
us.
post. Whatever it is,
Yeah.
but just that fact that, you know, he has a mission, he's going on along a journey, and the fact that these women helped him accomplish that. And, you know, we saw that there was points in the film where he realized that he couldn't complete the mission without them. So it's interesting how we can see things in the film. We can see like kind of the external, but knowing about story, there's always there's this thing called narrative transportation. So you watch a film, you read a book, you're going to identify with some character for whatever reason, and it kind of pulls you into the story. And so even thinking about that identity component, it's interesting where you can talk to 3 or 4 different people, ask who their favorite character is. It's not necessarily King T'Challa. It could be the sister, Shuri. But at some time, you know, this is one of the films that we had a lot of people who are identifying with what we call the villain or the anti-hero in Killmonger.
Killmonger,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's really fascinating. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So we could see that in the film when Killmonger was introduced, he had a goal and a mission too. It's interesting how that, like, we can see today, like his main concern. And I want to hear you. I like the way you speak about this, Nathan. When we think about the character of Killmonger and what he wanted, and what he was missing, and then how he saw Wakanda play into that. Can you talk a little bit about that, like what we saw, and then we kind of get into what that really means in terms of how we feel and why we can resonate with that?
One of the biggest pains in life is abandonment. So when you look at this story, one of the biggest issues is Killmonger is bleeding in his heart because he feels abandoned by his people. And so, especially, you know, listening to people talk about this, but African Americans, when he talks about why have you not used this power to rescue us, right? So I've been abandoned by my people, and then here you guys are living in luxury and happiness and peace, and you have the power to come and rescue me. So when he calls, you know, T'Challa to the carpet and begins to confront him, if you are African American, like your blood is boiling, your heart is pounding, as he's saying, how can you let all of us sit in this oppression, and you guys have the power to do something about it? So, you know, most African Americans walked out of there identifying with Michael B. Everybody wanted to be Killmonger, but it was like, hey guys, well, chill out. We can't kill everybody. I mean, Killmonger is like, he's dysfunctional, and this is what happens when you have a disconnection with your family, with your father, where it can turn you into a killer. And so it was one of the most powerful places for me, because as he's saying that, you know, I'm sitting there like, yeah, why would you guys?
Feel you,
I feel you. Like what? So yeah, beat him up, beat him up. You know, so it was a very powerful position, but most people identified with that. If you've been oppressed, if you've been abandoned, which most of us have in our life, you know, it's hard not to identify with him.
No, that's a good point. So I want to bring it back a little bit. So thinking about what Killmonger wanted, and you mentioned like that, the ability that Wakanda had to utilize their power. So that comes down to an individual. It's an individual choice from whoever has that power. And so like in this scenario, it was basically King T'Challa, once he realized that this was an issue or a particular conflict, then he had to make a decision. And much like in life, we come to different points in our life where we're kind of put up against the wall to make a particular decision. And I want to hear you DJ talk a little bit about, so even thinking about this film and that particular theme, you brought up identity. How do you think that King T'Challa, realizing that this was an issue, how did that impact his idea of who he was as a person?
I think that he had to really confront what he thought he was supposed to do as a king and who he thought he was supposed to be. And the second time when he goes to the ancestral plane, he has to confront his father, who was the previous king. He had to, it's almost, in film, there's always a time when a character has to shed the identity that they started out with. So the characters usually have a trauma in the beginning of the film that creates this identity for them to survive thus far. And so the exciting thing about films is actually watching the character make a choice to shed that identity. So the internal journey that the character goes on has to do with, do I want that bad enough to risk death and take off what I thought I was supposed to do or who I thought I was supposed to be? And it's very, very scary for him because he's upsetting thousands of years of tradition. And that can be so scary, and it can feel like death, but there comes a time where he had to really say, was this right or was this wrong? And really grapple with, well, how do we go from there? And so I think that is a big theme about identity. I think Killmonger had that, as you were saying, that identity that he that resulted from the abandonment in the story. So we see what he chose to do, all the way even into the end, where he could have made one choice, but he chose to follow what some of our ancestors have done to stay away from being enslaved. And I did want to even mention the identity of the women. Usually in film, we don't see a lot of women with these well-rounded characters. And what I really appreciated about, I think, Denai, for the Dora Milaje, the commander, we saw her have love in her life. Yep. We saw her have courage, leadership, comedy.
She even had conflict and had a point in the story where she had to make a decision.
Yes.
You know, where was her loyalty?
Yes.
Was it with the country?
Yes.
Or was it with this person?
Yes.
And so again, you typically don't see that level of depth with secondary characters.
Right.
So to be able to follow that journey, which is really interesting. So we were talking about what we see in film, talked a little about kind of like the internal journey, what we felt. And the reason that is because story is so powerful. And so another thing we kind of talking about this is we can see that watching this film, we know it's impacted a lot of different types of people. And I know off camera, we were talking about a week ago about how you read or heard about a story where there were folks in, I think it was Korea. And can you tell us a little bit about, just kind of share a little bit about, and what if you can pull out the impact of actually them watching a story and how it actually like changed the way they thought about an entire people group?
So that's why I really am passionate about this work is when you talk about, you know, this film, you know, end up really modeling life, or does life model film? Well, there's this thing called propaganda, right? Where you can make people follow your narrative and what you believe, and you can make them believe who the hero is and who the enemy is. So when we talk about the impact of this film, I was looking at some interviews, and they were in Korea, they did some, and in China. So these are Chinese people and Korean people saying how they now view black people after watching this film. Not the film, but how they view black people in real life after watching this film. And people were literally saying things like, I didn't think black people were attractive until I watched this film. I didn't see black people as intelligent until I watched this film. That's how important film is. That's the impact that this film had around the nation, seeing black people in a superior position in this film. So the impact of this movie really was life-changing for people all over the world, but it's just that simple that when you place an image before people, it changes the brain forever. And so for African Americans, Africans, black people, people of color, another aspect of women, you had women in these positions of power, and they were superheroes too. And you could not win or get the victory. And that was important because that's the African American story where we would not have made it without black women. Over and over and over again, from voting to the family structure to them being put over us and we under them intentionally, black women have always played this powerful role, but not on film.
Right.
Right.
You know, so to see our it was like the truest narratives of us were placed in all these little bitty stories for the first time in this grand film that's seen around the world, but it just changes the perspective. So the film is so important, but I would say that it's actually what you see changes you. That's how the brain works. It's what you see. So if people can get a hold of the story and their control of the narrative, they control everything.
Man, that's powerful. It's one of those things. It's like that's encouraging to see because you can see that film or story can be used as a positive mechanism. But the flip side of that is to show it's so powerful that it can be used for evil. And it seems like traditionally, that's what it's been used for. And as we progress with this particular series, and we can't even talk about this, but there's one film that we're going to talk about. It's called Birth of a Nation. Just give me a little teaser. And to show how powerful that narrative is and still is today. From those 1929, 1930, full of propaganda. But those things still happen. And we're talking about film and story, But one of the things that we hope that as you continue to go along this journey with us is that when you see story, whether it be in film, television, you're reading a book, hopefully you'll be able to see that pattern when you're watching. You'll be a critical thinker. So even watching a news programs, newscasting, it's all story. There's going to be some type of a villain, fake or not, boogeyman. You don't always have to see the boogeyman, but if you can describe the boogeyman, give characteristics of the boogeyman, and then position a hero that can kind of help you defeat the boogeyman, it's happening. And so hopefully that's one thing that even kind of you take this journey, you'll be able to be a critical thinker. Hopefully through the process we won't ruin movies for you.
Yeah.
Or, start to see this.
Or we'll make them more enjoyable.
We'll make them more
I
enjoyable.
want to jump in with a question concerning identity with Nathan, concerning the courage that it took for him to shed off what he thought. So I'm curious in your mind how we all have to go through these journeys in life as we grow and mature and follow in our own purpose that God's given us. What are some of the things that probably held him back, and probably what lessons we could take that probably would hold us back in life?
You touched on it a little bit with the nuance of him realizing his father, who his father really was. So, we grow up thinking sometimes our parents are perfect. And so when he realized that his father was not perfect, so he was trying to be this awesome king, that held him back. Because it's like, how can I become this guy that I've placed on a pedestal, which is my father, only now to find out that my father is not perfect. There's a nuance to his character, right? And so then I have to figure out now, who am I based off of who I thought I was gonna be, who I couldn't be, but now this guy isn't as great as I thought he was. And all that is called as maturity, right? When you mature and you understand everyone is not perfect. If there is someone perfect, it's what we would call a creator. But it's not our parents. If you weren't raised by Jesus or Mother Mary, your parents ain't perfect, and you probably got some issues as a result of it. You need to go to therapy. That's why I'm doing this, tell y'all, America needs to go to therapy, okay? So there's a sense of superiority that people think they must achieve in order to reach their goals. And so he found out his father was just a man that had to make complex decisions, and he made some mistakes. And so he had to get over that to realize who he was. And so then he became his own man, and that's what we're all really trying to do as people, become our own best self. But a big piece is getting over childhood wounds. Everything you do in life, what you don't know, has to do with how you grew up, your childhood wounds. So once you get over those things and you face those things, then you can grow up. It's what Paul said, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I reasoned as a child, and now I have put away childish things. You can't reason, you can't think in a complex way until you grow up and put away childish things.
And that also, I think when he was able to go through that process, from then on in the film, you saw him being, I think, a more active in the storyline. He wasn't like, okay, I'm going to be king. My father died, and I'm going to be king. Now I have to do the ceremony. And it was like a lot of stuff was happening to him. And then when he went through that process, he was able to start being proactive in his journey as king. And I think that can really relate in our lives too. The time when we can go through that journey, I've experienced just more freedom to be able to take those active steps in my life and really feel like you could build your own legacy at this point.
Yes.
You could really walk in and be your own man or woman. And I'm curious what you guys think about the relationships between the men and the women. We saw a lot of different types of relationships, but what I was really fascinated with was the king with his warriors and his advisory group. It was men and women in the advisory group, and his warriors were all women, but you never felt like he was ever putting anyone down or they were less than. They were just equally as important. He took their advice, took their suggestions, he cared about what they had to say, and I had the feeling that he would go to war for them as much as they would go to war for him. And it was, they didn't even have to say words, it was just like how they carried themselves, I think the actors really have to get some, props for their
I would say that.
performance.
Props, you guys
You know?
did good if you're watching this.
And we miss you, Chadwick. We
Yeah.
miss you. Yeah, I was curious because even Killmonger and his relationship with the woman in his life she was expendable, for what he was trying to get. So how did that affect you guys as men, married men? Like, how did that affect, did it affect you, how you saw that?
Yeah, I can say one being as a married man, but also a father of two young girls. Having that representation on the screen there, I think it was the way that they were represented was there was this mutual respect, but the women, they all had their own goal, but also going back to the male and female relationship, what is it that many times keeps us from seeing, especially for men, seeing women as equal in certain areas where they can actually have their own, trajectory, and we can come alongside them and help them and work together.
For me watching this movie, when I'm dealing with couples, I need examples for the best imagery of what does a healthy marriage look like. It's powerful because biblically, it really names the best example, but chauvinism has distorted it. So biblically, it looks more like Wakanda, where there's co-equal heirs. It's a superiority complex that has infected the biblical text, or the best therapeutic ideal of what marriage is. It's supposed to be two people that are both powerful individuals that come together and agree on the positions they both play. They don't agree on the positions because you're superior and one is inferior. They agree because you have this gift and you have this gift, and we acknowledge that we are both gifted in this areas. So, another movie I use with Black Panther is The Incredibles, where the second movie you have the wife, and they say, we want you to be the central hero, and the husband's like, okay, but I don't know what I'm doing at home. I don't think I'll learn it though. But it wasn't like I'm better than you. It wasn't an inward fighting. It was like, I got your back because you're just as incredible. So in this movie, it was awesome because you see the true essence of a king and a queen. That she's bad too, and she can kick everybody if she wants to, and I can too. And one of the most powerful pieces is watching that he's a hero, and you have these black women as his protectors.
Right.
I mean, there's nothing more powerful
Right.
than that. With
imagery
Spears,
is just- yeah.
their show up, that one scene where at the very beginning where the king is there, but when he appears, there's this woman, and then there's these two women with spears. They remind me of like cherubims or angels, standing next to you. Yeah, I love the imagery throughout this movie of the king and queen in these relationships, because they were a royal people, so each individual relationship was really kingly and queenly. Everybody's relationship was this royal relationship, and it was just beautiful to see black people portrayed in that way. And historically, that's how we have lived. It's just the Olmecs, right? The Moors, like we don't, the Negritos, we're not told these stories of these royal people that ruled the world. And even the first queens that ruled everything, the pharaohs were actually women sometimes, right? So we didn't have this thing where only men could rule. That is more of our culture and our destiny. So to see it portrayed like that was just absolutely beautiful. And I watched my daughter see that and walk out, with her kente cloth after the movie, feeling powerful, right? And knowing how to respect a man at the same time. She could be powerful and respect her husband. And my son could know that, hey, I can be powerful and I can be a husband, but I need a warrior princess that I respect. So that it was just beautiful all the way around.
No, I love that. I love that picture of just how they complement each other, come together, and one and one does not make two. One and one makes more than two.
Yes.
And so, no, it was beautiful. So, yeah. So one of the other topics that this film really did a really good job of diving into and giving a platform, one was colonialism, which I think is it was really, on this particular grand scheme, to see how just the concept of colonialism was represented, like in its truest form.
Yeah.
And actually to be kind of ridiculed or whatever you want to say it, especially when you're,
Don't
what is he
sneak up on me.
colonizer. Yeah. So just let's take a few minutes to kind of talk just a little bit how the film actually kind of represented just the impact of colonialism. That's just a hard word. I'm not going to say the word anymore.
It's a dirty word, so that's okay.
So I'm opening up the floor right now to talk. So who wants to go first?
I knew at that point Ryan Coogler, his brilliance. To me, only an African American could have presented that the right way. Meaning that I've never seen a film where colonialization is put in a derogatory way, but the only way it could happen is if the person who was critiquing it was coming from a superior position. That's the only reason that we are looking down on it. When you're coming from a place of power and you got it even by killing, murdering, and raping, no matter what it is, if someone's under you criticizing that, it doesn't have the same power, because it's like, well, I'm still over you. And we don't understand, even when we're teaching young boys, especially white males, about Hitler, well, you think they're taking it negatively. But if you're a white male, you're seeing another male in power that had great buildings and this empire, and everyone listened to him, and they were taking over the world, and the technology they were coming up with. So when I'm counseling doctors, for example, when you're counseling arrogant people, you can't tell them nothing, because it's like, I'm powerful, I'm so smart, I got more money than you. How can you help me? It doesn't matter my wife and kids hate me and think I stink and don't want anything to do with me. So what made it so powerful, it was coming from a superior position, that you can also rule and have power, but you don't have to murder and rape and kill everybody. And what made them superior too was technology. We have never seen a film where people of color are in power because of technology. Although historically, they're figuring out the pyramids, right? All those things that were built that they want to say are by aliens, because they can't be from the colored people who have walls painted that they built all this stuff and tell you how they did it. And they're finding out it was power and electricity, all the things. They just assumed that they were big tombs because they're people of color. I mean, that's insane, but it's these dumb assumptions that destroy us, right? So it was so powerful to see colonization made fun of from a superior position. And that's what really stood apart in this film. And we're cracking up, and everybody's cracking up. It didn't matter what race you were or ethnicity, because we now know historically, well, that wasn't the best way to go about things, right? So the way he kidded about it, but we were never seen as inferior in this entire film, not one time. And then they're poking fun at people who have called themselves superior for doing something terrible. So I just, as an African American, it was entertaining, and it was awesome to sit in that perspective for once.
Sounds like you're saying that going back to kind of narrative transportation, it took a story to kind of go in the back way to deliver that package to them so they can see it. But what it was, the components of that story, they actually saw visually folks in dark skin that actually were superior in this particular story. And it was actually easier for their brain to digest and get to the point where they can actually see, okay, colonization, man, that's bad.
Let me tell you how deep it is, how you set that up. The truth is, even if I believe something is wrong with it, but I'm never seeing any true stories where it's wrong, I still have a superiority complex, and I still don't fully accept that it is wrong, because I'm sitting in power because of this. So how could it totally be wrong? Even though I know and I believe, and I'll say it, talking to people, that wasn't the best way, I've never seen it presented in film in a narrative that it's negative and there is another way. So it's still superficial that I believe something's wrong with it. And that's really how the brain works. So you're exactly right. It's the narratives, right? That's why Jesus used to tell so many parables, because it's the parables that place you in a different position and perspective and allow you for once to see yourself.
Man, that's deep. So speaking of narratives, there's false narratives, and then there's like the real narratives. So we talked about how like the film positioned colonialism, and the fact that coming from the perspective of
Maybe
someone
you just shouldn't say it.
I'm not going to say. I'm going to say the C word. So the C word.
Oh, I like that.
The C word. You know?
Yeah, the C word.
Written and directed from the perspective of someone who actually has been impacted by that. So that kind of segues into our next topic, was thinking about like the relationship between Africans and African Americans and others. This is the first time, it seems like these one of the first times that it was given this great a platform, and the narrative was actually developed, that thoroughly. So can we talk a little bit about that? And I'm really interested to hear from your perspective, because from the looks of it, if someone just saw you, they would say, "Oh, this is the black woman," and without digging any deeper, just imagine, well, she's probably an African American. Both her mother and father are probably just African Americans. But from your perspective, can you give us a little bit about that topic, especially because of who you are?
Right. So for those of you who don't know, my mother is from Jamaica and my father is from India. So I call myself a Jamindian. But we have
you can be the vice president.
Yeah,
though, right?
I could be the vice president.
Kamala, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've always struggled because of the boxes I had to check, because there was never a Jamindian box. It was white, and then at the bottom it was always black. And so that in itself is kind of like a microaggression. You're always seeing the lighter color, or the white, or that in the top, or the first place. Like even when we read, I notice that stuff because I've had to deal with it so specifically. And I think people are starting to understand today, like being black, being of color, there's this beautiful spectrum within it. And it doesn't look one way in America, or where my mom's from in Jamaica. I think there's beautiful similarities because the West African culture is in Jamaica still. I just loved how specifically Ryan Coogler, I could see that he must have had those feelings of Killmonger to write that rich character, but it's also heartbreaking to watch as a child of immigrants, to feel that gap, or to feel, I don't know, like I think I had mixed feelings because I live in America and I see it, and I have experienced racism and sexism, but I also have this other side where my mom is from this other country where she was the majority, and my mother-in-law is from Ethiopia, so she was in the majority of a country that was never the C word. And they, there's kings and queens, and I mean very recent kings. Haile Selassie was the last one. That's like in the last 70 years, I think. And so, I don't know, it just really made me think a lot about that relationship. And my mother-in-law said that who's from Ethiopia, said this movie made her cry because she's always seen this gap between people who, as Killmonger says, we look the same. We just have these different cultures, but we are in together going through similar struggles. I don't know, I thought that was just really, really powerful. And, I didn't really get that portion until, a while after I watched it and I was marinating on it, this global perspective of being black and helping one another.
As an African-American male, I've never really thought for a long period, like deeply, like what it would have been like if our African ancestors didn't engage in trading of people. And then thinking about the story, put myself in Killmonger's shoes, there is this sense of like kind of abandonment because not knowing, like I could talk to friends who they can trace their history, like white friends, all the way back to like the first king of such and such, all these generations. And then we try to track our lineage, we can only get to a certain point just because of, things were cut off. And just thinking about what that actually does as a person, thinking about not really knowing where you really come from, but the way that was portrayed, and even actually seeing the relationship between African American and Africans, and actually seeing that kind of portrayed on screen was one, it got me kind of thinking about that. Like, what would that be like to be united in that way, and the fact that it was a lot of care. I think it was just the fact that, you know, having Coogler being involved, there was a lot of care in crafting that particular narrative. And I think a lot of folks who, even like African Americans, because of lots of things, we even think of ourselves as a certain way.
Yes.
Yes.
But if we realize that in our past, in our history, that we come from royalty, and, you know, we are regal people, and all that, just how that would impact how we see ourselves and each other, and how we interact with each other.
That propaganda is really what you're talking about, was juxtaposed when he said, oh, you're not a silly American. We don't ever see an American film talking about how silly Americans are, and then the superior ones were Africans.
Right.
So even as black people, we might say we're pro-black, pro-African, but we've never seen Africans portrayed in an awesome way. So then we meet African people and we'll be negative towards them and make fun of them. In this movie, for the first time, you see African and African Americans coming together, dressed up in kente cloths, and us really celebrating our roots. Because, yeah, we're taught to have inferior thoughts about one another. Africans will come here and feel superior to us because they're constantly seeing, you know, negative propaganda against us, and we're seeing negative propaganda against them, and there's this brainwashing. And for the first time, a film.
Right.
I mean, that's what drives me crazy, personally. Like, a film. We live in a kindergarten. Right. Somebody made a film.
It came out of a comic book.
Out of a comic book, and now
pictures.
And now we're coming together because
Right.
we saw I mean, that's how silly and simple the brain is, and that's how powerful. I could do all the therapy in the world, help people change their lives. They can go see one movie and it undoes everything.
Yeah, right.
Because they saw one film. That's how terrible that the industry can wreak havoc. Right. That's why you spend $1 billion on one commercial during the Super Bowl, because it changes people's minds. But African and African Americans, as a result of this film, were celebrating one another. I don't know if I've ever seen that.
Right.
Period. But let alone from a film.
Well, I know, you know, we can talk all day
Oh, yeah.
about this stuff.
Well, did you guys think it made the mark or missed the mark?
Oh man.
Made the mark. Made the mark. Made the mark.
Yeah.
This-
My kids got to see a Marvel movie at 7 and 10, and all they know now are black heroes. So yeah, we don't know about that experience of seeing a film like that and seeing these heroes look like us. So that, yeah, I can't say enough.
It was beautiful and powerful. So, anyway, well, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. And we'll just leave you with one question. I guess it's like, who are you?